Let's talk about something that all of us at some point wrestle with: feeling alone. Not just being alone, but that deep internal sense that no one truly sees you. No one gets what you're going through. It's that invisible isolation that can creep in even when you're surrounded by people. And here's the truth that many of us need to hear: just because you feel alone doesn't mean you are alone. Now, that might sound like a cliché, but if we dig into it, there's something psychologically and spiritually profound about that statement. Human beings are wired for connection. From birth, we're designed to seek out others, emotionally, physically, spiritually. So when that connection feels absent, when we experience silence or distance in our relationships or from the world, it's like something inside of us begins to panic. That's not weakness. That's biology, and it's also where a lot of unnecessary shame starts to grow. You begin to question your worth. You ask, why do I feel this way? What's wrong with me? Why can't I just be happy or content? And what makes it worse is the illusion that everyone else seems connected. Social media shows smiling faces, perfect families, deep friendships. But behind the scenes, most people are managing some level of isolation. They just don't talk about it. That illusion creates a deeper fracture where not only do you feel alone, you feel uniquely broken. But here's what I want to challenge you with. What if the feeling of loneliness is not evidence of God's absence, but rather an invitation to recognize His presence in a new way? See, according to Dr. Charles Stanley, and this resonates deeply with what many of us experience, loneliness is not always a problem to be fixed. Sometimes it's a place where something sacred begins. In Hebrews 13:5, there's this powerful promise: I will never leave you nor forsake you. And I want to pause there for a second. That word, never, is absolute. Not sometimes. Not unless you mess up. Not only if you're spiritually strong. It's never. Now, intellectually, that's easy to accept. Emotionally, not so much. Because when we feel abandoned by people, by circumstances, even by our own selves, it's hard to reconcile that with the idea that God is present. But part of emotional and spiritual maturity is learning that feelings are not always the most reliable indicators of reality. Feelings are real, yes, but they are also temporary. They are signals, not verdicts. Think about that. Just because you feel fear doesn't mean there's danger. Just because you feel unworthy doesn't mean you are. And just because you feel alone does not mean you are cut off from love, from support, or from divine connection. Here's where the philosophy kicks in. The human mind tends to equate presence with perception. If we don't perceive it, we assume it's not there. But that's not how presence works. Love, support, even God's nearness, they can all exist beneath the surface, outside of our immediate awareness. Just like radio waves in the air or the gravitational pull of the earth. We don't feel them every second, but they're holding us up just the same. So the shift has to be internal. It's a reframing. When you feel alone, ask, what am I believing right now? Am I believing that my value depends on someone else's approval? Am I believing that my worth has been diminished because of loss or silence? Or am I willing to believe that something greater is present, even if I can't feel it yet? Dr. Stanley often said that God's presence is not contingent on our emotions. And that's such a liberating idea, because it puts us back in control of our focus. You don't have to feel connected to be connected. You don't have to feel loved to be loved. And you don't have to feel strong to be sustained. Here's the practical piece. When that wave of loneliness hits, and it will, don't let it push you into isolation. Let it be a signal to lean in. Take 5 minutes to sit in silence, not with your phone, not with the noise, but with the awareness that maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think. Let that space be sacred, even if it's uncomfortable. And if you're a person of faith, remind yourself, out loud if you have to, of that promise: He will never leave me. He will never forsake me. Say it until your heart catches up with your mind. Because truth, repeated, becomes internalized. And when the truth is that you are never truly alone, that has the power to reshape how you live, how you love, and how you show up for yourself and others. So the next time you feel the weight of loneliness pressing in, I want you to pause, breathe, and remember, presence doesn't always announce itself, but it's always there. Let's continue this conversation about loneliness, not as a permanent identity, but as a passing experience. One of the biggest mistakes we make, especially when we're hurting, is assuming that what we feel right now will always be true. But here's the second truth I want to offer you. Loneliness is a season, not a sentence. And the difference between those two ideas is everything. Think about it. A sentence is handed down. It's fixed. It's final. It implies you're stuck, that this is how things are going to be indefinitely. That's what loneliness can feel like when you're in the thick of it. It whispers, this is just how your life is now. Everyone else has moved on. You've been forgotten. You're going to feel this forever. But that voice, that's not truth. That's fear speaking. That's pain trying to narrate your future. A season, on the other hand, is defined by change, by movement, by transition. Seasons may be long, they may be uncomfortable, they may not make a whole lot of sense while you're in them, but they end, they shift, they evolve. And when you start viewing loneliness as a season, you create space for hope. You give yourself permission to grow through it instead of just surviving it. Dr. Charles Stanley talked about how God doesn't waste our pain. That idea has always stuck with me, not because it softens the pain itself, but because it reframes it. It gives it meaning. And meaning, even more than comfort, is what most people are actually searching for when they're suffering. We can tolerate a lot when we believe it matters. Psychologically, loneliness taps into some of our deepest fears. Fear of rejection, fear of invisibility, fear of not being chosen. But often it also signals a kind of life disruption. Something has ended a relationship, a chapter, a sense of identity. And when we don't know what's coming next, we panic. Our brains crave clarity and certainty, and when we don't get that, we start to internalize the uncertainty as something wrong with us. But here's where the shift happens, sir. What if the season of loneliness is not the evidence of something being broken, but the necessary pause before something new is born? It's during these seasons that we tend to encounter ourselves more honestly than we do when everything is going well. The silence of loneliness forces reflection. It reveals the places we've over-relied on people for our sense of worth, or where we've used business to avoid facing something deeper. It slows us down long enough to ask, who am I when no one else is watching? What do I actually want? What do I believe about my own value? Those are not easy questions, but they're the kind that, once answered, set the foundation for the rest of your life. Philosophically, this ties into the ancient idea of the wilderness experience. You see it in scripture, you see it in myth, you see it in countless heroes' journeys. This pattern where the individual is pulled out of comfort, out of community, into the unknown. At first, it looks like punishment. But in almost every case, the wilderness becomes the training ground. It becomes the place where clarity, purpose, and identity are forged. And that's not just metaphor. Think about your own life. Some of your most defining insights, the ones that shaped your character or shifted your direction, probably came during times when you were isolated, confused, or in transition. That wasn't failure. That was formation. So if you're in that space right now, if the loneliness feels like a fog that won't lift, I want to challenge you to do something counterintuitive. Stop trying to escape it. Stop trying to numb it or rush past it. Instead, get curious. Ask what this season is here to teach you. Ask what parts of your identity you've been neglecting. Ask what you've been afraid to face. Because buried in this discomfort might be the clarity you've been searching for. Dr. Stanley often reminded us that God uses every circumstance, including our lowest points, to shape our character and deepen our dependence on Him. And from a psychological standpoint, that dependence on something larger than ourselves actually helps rewire our brains away from hopelessness. Purpose interrupts despair. Even if your circumstances don't change immediately, your perspective can. And here's the beauty of a season: you don't have to know exactly when it will end to know that it will. Just like winter eventually gives way to spring, this too shall pass. Not because time magically heals everything, but because you are actively growing, even if you can't see it yet. So if you remember nothing else, remember this: loneliness may visit, but it doesn't get to move in. It's part of your journey, not your identity. Let it shape you, but don't let it define you. Let's talk about what you can actually do with loneliness, because it's one thing to understand it, to know it's temporary, to believe you're not truly alone. But at some point, you still have to decide how you're going to respond when it shows up. And this is where most people either avoid the pain or numb it. That's natural. It's human. We reach for distraction. Our phones work, noise, people, because silence feels unbearable. But the truth is, the silence holds the key. Here's the third truth I want to explore with you. Loneliness can become a pathway to intimacy with God. It doesn't have to be dead space. It can be sacred space, but only if you're willing to enter it instead of running from it. Let's be honest. Most of us treat loneliness like a fire drill. When it hits, health fails, we scramble to find someone or something to make the feeling stop. But what if we've been misreading that signal? What if the ache you feel when you're alone isn't just a craving for human connection? It's a craving for divine connection. Dr. Charles Stanley said many times that God speaks most clearly when we're quiet enough to listen. And not the kind of quiet where you're waiting for a text to come through or halfway listening to a podcast in the background. No, this is the kind of internal stillness where you get brutally honest with yourself, where you sit with the question, what am I really missing? What void am I actually trying to fill? Psychologically, what's interesting is that loneliness and spiritual longing often get confused. The brain doesn't always distinguish between a lack of social engagement and a lack of spiritual fulfillment. They both create the same emptiness, the same restlessness. And if you try to treat a spiritual need with a social solution, it will never be enough. You'll keep bouncing from conversation to conversation, relationship to relationship, looking for something that no person can actually give you. That's why this idea matters so much. Because when you stop treating loneliness as a signal that something's wrong with you, and instead see it as a signal that something deeper is calling you, you stop reacting and you start responding. You start turning toward God, not just as a coping mechanism, but as a relationship that has the power to anchor you. And here's the fascinating part: the more intentional you are in your solitude, the less lonely it becomes. That might sound counterintuitive, but it's real. Philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." That statement was made in the 1600s, and it's only more true today. Most people are afraid of solitude because they don't know what they'll find when the noise stops. But solitude isn't the enemy. It's the classroom. And this is where spiritual intimacy begins. Not in crowds, not in rituals, but in stillness. Think about the relationships you value most. What makes them deep? Time, vulnerability, presence. The same thing applies to your relationship with God. It takes time to cultivate. It takes space. And sometimes the very loneliness you hate is the exact space where that relationship can grow. Dr. Stanley often described those quiet moments with God not as a retreat from the world, but as preparation for it. When you spend time in that space, when you open yourself to hear, not just talk, you begin to sense a strength that doesn't come from you. You begin to shift your focus away from what's missing toward what's eternal. And here's the practical side of this: you don't need a perfect routine or a mystical experience. You just need intention. Set aside 10 minutes a day. Put your phone down. Don't fill the time with endless words. Just sit. Breathe. Ask, what are you trying to show me? You might feel nothing at first. That's okay. Most things worth building don't give instant gratification. But over time, that space will become familiar. Not because the loneliness goes away immediately, but because now you're not sitting it alone. You're meeting someone in it. This changes the dynamic entirely. You're not desperate for someone to rescue you from the pain. You're discovering that even in the absence of people, you are deeply connected. You're not waiting for life to feel full again. You're learning how to experience fullness in the midst of quiet. And that kind of intimacy, that changes how you walk through the world. You don't carry loneliness like a wound. You carry solitude like a strength. You no longer need everyone to understand you because you're grounded in the one who already does. So the next time you feel the pull of loneliness, don't resist it. Enter it. Sit with it. Let it draw you closer to the only connection that's unshakable. And let that connection fill what nothing else can. Let's bring everything we've been talking about into focus with one final grounding truth. Because it's possible to understand that God is present, to recognize that loneliness is seasonal, and even to begin turning that space into spiritual intimacy and still struggle with feeling disconnected from your core identity. That's the deeper layer of loneliness we don't always naming, not just being without people, but being unsure of who we are without them. And this is where identity becomes essential. At the heart of Dr. Charles Stanley's message is this reminder: when you belong to Christ, you are never truly alone, because you are part of something eternal. That's not just a spiritual comfort. That's a philosophical and psychological anchor. Because when you know who you belong to, and when you know that belonging can't be taken from you, it changes how you show up in your loneliest moments. Let me be clear here. Belonging is one of the most powerful psychological needs we have as humans. Abraham Maslow placed it right after safety on the hierarchy of human needs. We crave it, we chase it, we shape our identities around it. But when that belonging is based on people, on approval, on circumstances, it's fragile. One breakup, one job loss, one life transition, and suddenly that sense of connection shatters. But belonging to Christ, that's not conditional. That's not based on how you feel, how you perform, or how together your life looks. It's a gift, it's fixed, it's grounded in grace. And once you begin to internalize that, not just the idea of it, but the reality of it, it reframes your entire experience of being alone. Because now, instead of defining yourself by what's missing, you begin to define yourself by what's unshakable. You're not just someone who's lonely. You're someone who is loved, seen, and chosen. Even in the silence, you're not waiting to be validated by others. You're already validated by the one who knows you completely. There's a kind of identity security that develops when you finally believe deep down that you belong to God. It doesn't mean you'll never feel alone again. It just means those moments don't get to define you anymore. They become passing weather, not your climate. Let's take it one step deeper. Philosophically speaking, identity that's rooted in something transcendent is far more resilient than identity that's built only on personal narrative or external validation. The self is dynamic. It changes. You grow. You fail. You learn. But when the core of your identity is tied to something unchanging, it gives you the strength to navigate that evolution without losing your center. And spiritually, that unchanging foundation is found in Christ. It's found in the promise that you are adopted, accepted, and held. Romans 8 talks about how nothing can separate us from the love of God. Not hardship, not loneliness, not even our own doubts. That's not metaphor. That's reality. And when you live from that place, everything shifts. Here's what that shift looks like in real time. You stop chasing people to fix your loneliness. You start showing up whole, knowing that your worth isn't up for negotiation. You stop waiting to feel connected in order to act confident. You start living from connection, even when no one else is around. And let me just say, this isn't about pretending you're okay when you're not. It's about building a deeper truth underneath the pain. So yes, acknowledge the H. Name it. Feel it. But also speak truth over it. Remind yourself, I am not abandoned. I am not forgotten. I belong. Even now, because here's the thing, loneliness doesn't just make us feel isolated. It makes us forgetful. It makes us forget who we are. It makes us forget that we are part of a story so much bigger than our current struggle. So this is your reminder your feelings are valid, but they are not the full picture. The full picture includes a God who sees you, who walks with you, and who calls you his own. Dr. Stanley believed this to his core, and he taught it not just with words, but with the way he living steady, grounded, unshaken by temporary circumstances, because he was rooted in eternal truth. And that's the invitation for you today, to stop living from lack and start living from identity. To stop defining yourself by the relationships that didn't last and start defining yourself by the relationship that always will. So when you feel alone, and you will, don't just sit in the feeling. Speak to it. Challenge it. Declare what's true. Even if your emotions haven't caught up yet, that's not denial. That's discipline. And it's how you reclaim your power. Because at the end of the day, your loneliness does not define you. Your belonging does.